Yes, my name is Denise. I'm calling from Kernersville, North Carolina. And my question is, in church, when you're having communion, if you don't have it for like 4 or 5 years, is that okay to not have communion for like 4 or 5 years? Thanks.
Well, Stephen, I thought that what the Bible said is that whenever there's a fifth Sunday in a month, that's when we're supposed to serve communion. Isn't that what it says?
There's probably a verse somewhere close to it. No, actually, Scott, the Bible does not say that.
Oh, okay.
And we might have been raised that way. I know for me, it was traditional that communion was tacked on at the end of a service, usually every quarter. And it was sort of a speed drill, I remember. It was after a long service, regular sermon, regular music, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to have communion. So I think this question's an excellent question. I'm so glad that Denise wrote in about this because I think we need to address both ends of the spectrum. But quickly, to her question, her fellowship is not having communion and hasn't had it for 4 to 5 years now. I was a bit shocked to hear 4 to 5 years. I was almost expecting her to say 4 to 5 months, and then she said years. Well, we know from the early church practice this was significant, and in fact, it seems according to Acts chapter 2, they were doing it very often. Often they would meet. Sometimes there were groups meeting daily, and they would take a portion of their meal, set it aside, and then use it as a remembrance of the Lord. I mean, think how significant it is that Jesus says, remember me this way. When you do this, you're remembering me. Can't imagine a loved one saying, would you do something every so often to remember me? And then we ignore it? We ignore it for years? I can't imagine that. So we have to be careful that we certainly include this as a regular pattern. I don't think it needs to become a ritual, a tradition. Scott, you kind of mentioned, our background, a tradition became a ritual. I personally feel like the average church tacks it on. You can get a little communion cup now with a plastic seal over it, and then on top of the plastic seal is a little piece of bread, and then over that's a little piece of plastic, and you can hand those things out in 30 seconds, you can be done with it. I don't think that's any better than not doing it for 5 years, frankly. When we do it, when we practice this, when we observe this, it's something that is precious to the believer because it reminds us of the gospel, the life-giving sacrifice of Jesus Christ. In 1 Corinthians 11, we're told, look, when you do this, for as often as you eat this, by the way, he didn't say every time you meet, you eat this, but as often as you eat this, do it this way. And we're to take it with a clean conscience. Don't abuse it. Don't trample on the blood of Christ, as it were, by coming to the table with cherished sin. Let's make sure if there's division in the body, if there's division between you and another believer, this is what Paul talked about, especially in 1 Corinthians 11, make sure you take care of that. So don't sin in partaking of the Lord's table by coming with unconfessed sin. In fact, to the Corinthians, Paul let them know there were Christians who were dead. They had died because they were cherishing, hiding sin, and coming to the Lord's table. Do you come to the Lord's table sinless? Absolutely not. It's impossible for you to be sinless. You're gonna sin in some thought between the offering and the last hymn. But you confess it, you make things right, and you reject it, and you remember the sacrifice of Christ, and then you partake with great joy.
Stephen, I think that some people may be curious to know how often communion is served at Colonial Baptist Church where you pastor. I guess I've never really counted. I know it's several times a year.
Yes, it ends up being around 4 to 6 times a year. We purposefully do not announce it. We want people to come without any sense of ritual or, okay, this is the Sunday in the quarter we do it. And then we plan it at different times. And then what we do is we plan the entire service around it. It isn't tacked on at the end of it. So
let me jump in here, Stephen, and mention how much I appreciate the way we do celebrate communion at Colonial. I grew up like you did, I think, where it was tacked on at the end. And didn't have the significance that it seems to carry for me now. I appreciate that. But I have one more question, which some mothers and fathers might be asking out there. Do we trivialize communion in any way when we have children participate, especially very young children?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. There's nothing in the scriptures that say you have to do one ordinance before you can experience or observe the other one. As a parent, it's a challenge, and it's a matter of discipleship to bring your children to the point of understanding the significance of baptism. They need to be able to testify to being redeemed. It's a public ordinance. It's not a private ordinance. And I don't think either one of these are private. I don't take a little kit to the hospital to give communion. This is not a private ordinance. This is for the body to experience together. Why? Because it is symbolically identifying with the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That wheat seed goes in the ground, it dies, it's buried, and then it brings forth fruit. And so this is why Jesus, I think very significantly, said to his disciples, by the way, as he instituted the ordinance there in the upper room, he said, I'm not going to drink of the fruit of the vine until I drink it with you new in the kingdom. So I think there's significance here to the very elements, and we don't want to trivialize either baptism or communion.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you so much, Denise, for calling in with your question.